Hey, it's Jonathan. One of the things that I've learned over the years is that a pretty significant part of our community are what I call conscious entrepreneurs. And what I mean by that is it's folks who are founders, and that could be of a business, an organization, foundation, private practice, anything like that, that have three things in common. One is that you serve a genuine need. You really solve a problem and you deliver that and get paid for it. And so solving a problem and generating real profit is important to you. The second is that what you create actually serves as a true vehicle for the expression of your strengths, your values and beliefs, and your voice. So it lets you step into your fullest potential. And the third is that there's something bigger happening here. You're part of something bigger and you're serving some bigger need. And that's what I call a conscious business. And we've created all sorts of experiences, programs, courses over the years designed to serve conscious business founders in a variety of ways. And amazing things have happened. We put pretty much everything on hiatus this year because we wanted to really deconstruct what we were doing and figure out how to bring more people together to serve them on a higher level. Because what we found is that not only do people need information and great advice and strategy and support, but there's a tremendous amount of isolation and loneliness for so many people who are in the business of founding conscious businesses. And we want to create a true community. So we've been at work at this for the better part of the year, and I'm really excited to share that we are now live with this really powerful new experience. It's called the 108, and it is a conscious business collective. And if you want to know what that's all about, if you want to figure out whether it's in any way something that would be interesting for you, then you can either just click on the link in the show notes or just head on over to goodlifeproject.com/the108. That's THE and then the number 108. Check it out. See if it feels right to you. If it does, then awesome. And if not, then thank you for listening. And I'm going to kick it over to today's guest. Thanks so much.
We went away for like a long weekend up out of the city and with our neighbors. And when we came back, my dad had just left a note and $50 and was like, I went to California. Bye. And, I think my mom probably saw it coming, but couldn't quite believe it was like that. And we got the eviction notice the next day.
Imagine waking up one day, about 5 years into life, living in an apartment with your mom and dad and brother on the Upper West Side of New York City, only to find that your dad has not come home, and shortly after, you, your mom, and brother are whisked into the middle of Iowa to become a part of a large spiritual community and all that goes along with that community. That's the story of today's guest, Claire Hoffman. She shares her journey of moving into the transcendental meditation community in its very early stages in the United States. And we get deep into what unfolded as she moved to a place called Utopia Park. In fact, it's all detailed in a book called Greetings from Utopia Park. This is not a judgment about transcendental meditation or the community, but we do talk about a lot of touchy topics and conversations. Everything from what transcendental meditation is, what the community was about, what some of the promises were around it, and how she responded to it and her family responded to it. She eventually left that community, went out into mainstream American life for a long time, and more recently in her adult life came back to it because there was a story that needed to be closed. There was a loop that needed to be closed. And we go into this. Really excited to share this conversation with you. I'm Jonathan Fields. This is Good Life Project. We're hanging out on the Upper West Side right now, which, if I'm right, this was where you life kind of started.
It's definitely where memories started.
Yeah. Were you far from here?
We were on West 98th Street.
Oh, so literally
West
like
End,
a couple blocks away.
Yeah.
What made you settle in the Upper West Side? Especially when you were here, the Upper West Side was not like the Upper West Side now.
No. I came back here 10 years ago with my mom for the first time since she'd left here in 1983. And she was like in a almost sort of hallucinatory state, taking it in like, oh my God, we went to our old building. She's like, everything is so shiny and new. This was not like that. it kind of blew her mind how fixed up everything had gotten.
Yeah, I mean, it's because the Upper West, it's funny because now, and for those who don't know, the Upper West Side of Manhattan is like, it's very nice, it's very family, it's very safe, it's beautiful, but there was a time not that long ago, a couple decades back, where it was not the place to be.
I think and the higher up you went, the harder it got.
Right.
So 98th Street was definitely, I remember my mom being scared every time we were on the street.
How old were you when you were right around there? Because you were here until 5-ish or something like that?
Yeah, I think we moved right before I turned 6, and I think we moved here when I was 3.
Do you have strong memories from that time?
I do. It really is like when it kicked in for me. I remember the street, I remember the subway, I remember the school, I remember the park.
Riverside Park, like at the end of your block?
Yeah.
I grew up the first, I want to say 3 years of my life, my dad was doing his PhD at Columbia.
Oh.
So we were on 116th Street, and I remember playing, like, at the end of the block, a little water fountain in the summers, running around.
Yeah, it's beautiful, right?
It is.
It's a great childhood, that piece of it.
Yeah, indeed. So you were hanging out there. Sounds like a pretty good life at that time, from what you knew as a... What were your folks up to at that moment?
So, let's see. My dad had just graduated from the writer's workshop at University of Iowa, and he had moved us to New York to be a playwright.
Was that program in Iowa at that time still held, like, in the esteem that it's now held? Was it like the premier program?
Yeah, I think he chose it over Yale, which when I was a kid, I was like, I don't get it.
Right, but it's like this legendary program.
Yeah. And he was sort of pursuing that dream. He had a play that was off Broadway, but he was also painting houses or apartments for a living. And my mom was going to FIT to do fabric design. But, that would be like the base level. But my dad was just drinking all the time. So my mom said the last year in New York, we didn't even really see him. He was just gone all the time.
Were you aware of that at all at that age?
Not really. I mean, what I remember is more my mom's anxiety when he was around, or the smell. But, I loved my dad. I thought he was so fun.
Yeah. How did your mom's anxiety manifest in a way that you really keyed in?
What happens often, which happened with me, is, when you have a single parent, which she basically already was, you kind of become like a adult with your parents. So I think she was confiding in me.
Right, at the age of like 3, 4.
Yeah. But, I saw that she was nervous. I knew she was nervous about money. We got an eviction notice right after he took off. So it wasn't incredibly intuitive of me. I think there were other things. My mom seemed a little fragile at that time, understandably.
And you have an older brother also.
Yeah, my brother's 2 years older than I am.
Right. Do you have any recollection of you and him sort of looking at each other like what's going on, or both sharing an understanding about what was going on?
You know what I have pieced together is that both my mom and my dad always say this now to me, that my brother and I were so well behaved. I have 2 toddlers now. And they always make this point, like, you and Stacy didn't do that, and it's supposed to be like this compliment. But when I go back, I'm like, well, that's because, we couldn't. There was no space for screwing around or having a tantrum or crying. Like, we were.
Right. You sense that even at that age.
Yeah. We were locked in.
Yeah. At some point also, they started getting involved at that age in meditation and TM.
They met, before we were born at a transcendental meditation retreat. So, and my mom had been into it. She learned when she was like 18 or 19. She had been doing it almost 10 years when she had me. So for her, that was a big part of life. Even when I was little, when we lived here, she would meditate 30 or 40 minutes in the morning and the evening. Not so much for my dad.
Yeah. So going to FIT was her dream to then enter that field and be a fabric designer?
I think so, yeah. My mom is I love her art. She's a really original, cool artist, very like chubby, Picasso-y, loose drawing. She's really creative. And I remember from back then her always making fabric and doing design. That became less of a priority over time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that was what she would have liked to have done.
So what about you? What kind of a kid were you back then?
Besides just really well behaved.
Yeah.
I think I was in my own world, that is what I both remember and what I've been told. So, I could just kind of disappear into a game or a dollhouse and just be, self-occupied for hours. I fought with my brother, but...
That's what older brother...
Yeah.
So it's like, I have an older sister for 2 years. So it's like, that's kind of what it's about.
It's intense. It's a 2-year age difference. It's intense. And my brother was always this kind of brilliant kid. He was really smart and he was a really pretty great looking kid. So I also felt like he got a lot of attention. So I could kind of be the
sneak under the radar.
Yeah, the under the radar kid. That was my perception of it. Who knows?
Got it.
Yeah.
At a certain point, everything comes to a head.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
We went away for a long weekend up out of the city and with our neighbors. And when we came back, my dad had just left a note and $50 and was like, I went to California. Bye. And, I think my mom probably saw it coming, but couldn't quite believe it was like that. And we got the eviction notice the next day. So her sister came up and helped her pack all our stuff, and we put it in storage at my grandfather's house in New Jersey. And we went down to Florida where her mother lived, and we lived there for 8 months. And, my mom was just trying to figure out what to do. It was a hard time. I remember her kind of locking herself away, crying a lot. And, I think my brother was sleeping on a cot. It was it was definitely touch and go. And then she went while we were staying with my grandmother to visit this place in Iowa. And she came back and she's like, this is it. We're moving there. It's going to be amazing. This is our new life.
Right.
Go to this amazing place where everybody meditates and, creating this sort of utopian world.
So what was going through your head back then when she's sort of describing
Awesome.
this? Sweet.
Yeah, sounds great. I mean, my mom coming from here, she was pretty wanted us in her sight all the time. She's pretty concerned with safety. And I just imagined a world of unlimited freedom, where I would just be able to roam outside and ride a bike and just be like a kid from a storybook living in the country, you know.
So you guys pack up then?
Yeah, we pack up and we move to Fairfield. We moved there in the middle of winter. It's like a blizzard. That's my memory of it. And we got there and right away, it didn't sync up with my mom's description or my memory of my mom's description of what it was going to be like. It was this little town. I mean, I don't think I'd ever been in a town that small, and it was pretty run down and gray snow drifts and freezing cold and beat up cars. And it just wasn't what I had imagined, being a 6-year-old with a fantasy of the Midwest.
Yeah. I mean, and also there's the town itself, but also, the campus, the thing that actually brought your mom to want to go there. Describe that a bit to me.
It was a work in progress. I mean, they bought the university 1973, 74.
And who's they?
Oh, sorry. Yes. So Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who was the founder of the Transcendental Meditation movement, at this point, it's grown into this worldwide trend or fad movement, whatever you want to call it. And he has sort of a core group of believers, followers who've learned how to teach meditation and are really tuned into him, taking courses internationally. My mom did this. And he bought this university in the early 70s in this little town in Iowa. And when he bought it, it was just this totally bankrupt party school, Parsons, where it was I have friends whose parents went there, weirdly, who aren't from Iowa.
Wait, it was not Parsons as part of New York?
No.
Okay.
No, Parsons College.
Got it.
Yeah, and it was just, there were these funny articles I found from the 60s about how wild it was, wild co-eds,
Oh, that's too funny.
They called it Flunk Out U because it's where you went if you flunked out of any other schools. But so that meant that the school had was already kind of in shambles, and then it gets taken over by a guy in India and his student followers. So by the early 80s, it was, it was pretty crumbled down already. But, there was a lot of vision and ambition. So, they built these 2 giant Golden Dome buildings, which were pretty spectacular, especially as a kid. And these were the places where they practiced advanced forms of meditation, including what they called the flying technique, which was meant to help you hover over the ground.
Right. Which we'll get to.
Okay, I don't want to jump ahead on it.
Right. So you show up and you see this tiny little town and then this campus in some blend of disarray meets big, glorious, giant things in the middle of it. Did your mom have the same lens? Like, did she look at it and see, we've arrived? Have you talked to her about that? Or?
Oh, yeah. I interviewed my mom a lot for this book. I mean, I think it's a mix. We got there and right away, we had to apply for food stamps because there was no work opportunities. I don't think, coming, from the coast into the Midwest, just the wages were really low and there was this flood of people coming in. So work was really hard to find. So that part was hard, and we were in a kind of crummy house and, it wasn't insulated and it was cold. And there was a lot that was challenging. But on the other hand, there was this incredible energy that she's described and that I remember of, it's like, you can't even imagine it. You've got, at this point, this is before the full 7,000 come in the next year, but say 3,000, 4,000 people who are all, in their 20s and 30s who've moved there together. They're all cool, college-educated kids who are super into meditation and consciousness and have this shared dream that they're changing the world together. And it's, even though it's hard, it feels fantastic, and they're walking together to these dome buildings to meditate together, and they're meditating, 3 or 4 hours a day. So I think it felt really good. So in the way that, like, maybe an example I might use would be camping, which I don't like, sometimes a little rough, but ultimately it can feel pretty great.
Right.
I think it was like that, like you were roughing it, but it felt good.
Yeah. And it's kind of like you belong.
Yeah.
There's a community and it's aspirational and it's built around hope and a set of practices, that everyone participates in.
When she talks about it, I sort of like get a little tingly because it's just, I can imagine now as an adult living away from anything like that for 20 years, it does sound incredible. To be able to, walk with your friends and go meditate together for hours at a time. It's a dream, and beyond that, the meditation, I think, made them feel so incredible. They felt so great. They were all kind of on this high together. And there was such a, part of the sort of philosophy that Maharishi had about this sort of oneness and unity of being. So people felt really connected to each other. So it just seems like just the best yoga class ever, never ending,
Yeah. And at the same time, let's zoom the lens out a bit for me. So what's going on in the world of transcendental meditation at that window in time, like bigger picture? What's happening?
Yeah. It was just sort of growing and growing through the 60s and 70s. The Beatles, went to Rishikesh in the late 60s, and that was like this big moment.
And Maharishi, that was the famed yogi,
yes.
this person who started this,
yes.
who they spent time with.
Yeah. And so, for better or worse, that was this sort of notorious moment that got all this publicity. He's on the cover of Life and the Saturday Evening Post. And that continues through the 70s. He's on, late night shows. He's the sort of go-to guru, like the most famous and the most sort of commercially savvy. And then in 1977, which is the year I was born, he introduces this advanced TM program. And this is a more expensive meditation technique that takes longer to learn. And it's called the Cities program, which, literally means superpowers. And he touts and advertises that, it'll give you these abilities, the strength of an elephant. There's these old advertisements, the ability to walk through walls, and then, of course, to learn to fly. And that was a shrinking moment for the movement. A lot of people who had been totally happy to meditate for 20 minutes in the morning and go about their day weren't on board with this idea of, levitating. That was too weird for them. So it kind of closed them off a little bit. That would be my analysis of it. It went from this big kind of pop culture global movement to something that's, smaller and more dedicated of true believers.
Yeah. It seems like there was the thing that made it expand so much was an openness, an ideology built around sort of an assumption of we are all one and an exploration of expanded consciousness. Who can argue with that, right?
Not me.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds awesome. Let's all do it.
Yeah.
And then, so it's interesting that when you sort of, you move from there to, and it can potentially give you superpowers, right? I mean, there's so many shifts in that, like, from a psychological standpoint, it shifts also. It seems like, I'm curious what your experience of this is. It seems like part of the shift that happened there is not just from, I can buy into this and participate in it, and to not only can I don't really buy that, but also it's almost like shifting more from service to others, service to the world, to more egoic in a way.
Yeah. And there's people who I know from my mom's generation who would make that criticism, who are true believers, who love Maharishi and who love the basic meditation, but feel like that was a bad choice. And that even the TM City program, no, I should say, the majority of people, who are moving to Fairfield and the people who are into this, I haven't met a lot of people who actually cared about the superpower, What they cared about and what Maharishi promised was that it would bring you to elevated states of consciousness. But there's these people that I'm referring to also, like there's criticism of that, with like not just the oneness and the being, but suddenly there's 7 states of consciousness and you're trying to climb them and achieve higher states of consciousness. And are you just in this state of consciousness? Or are you in that state of consciousness? And it's a lot of those people who moved to Fairfield, they wanted to be enlightened. Like that was the goal. It wasn't so much superpowers per se, but existing in these higher states of consciousness. And there was a lot of description, sort of word of mouth and discussion about, like, oh, I had this experience. I think it was cosmic consciousness. I mean, I feel like I heard that all the time growing up, of these like different experiences of states of consciousness. And so, as an adult looking back, I see that dividing, I think it was problematic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, instead of saying like, great, you're going to meditate and let's not label it or, make it have different levels or have different costs or have some people be more enlightened than others, like just meditate and have the experiences. Why do we have to have all these names for it?
You also just mentioned that there were different costs associated.
Yes.
Talk to me more about that, because I know this has been an interesting sort of conversation within not only the Transcendental Meditation community, but just the sort of meditation and aspirational community in general.
Yeah, there's a few reasons I wrote this book, but one of them is that I think Maharishi was a really early pioneer, for better and for worse. And he really was like the OG in terms of commercializing Eastern culture, Ayurveda, meditation, all this stuff. He was the guy who was trademarking stuff early.
And bringing it here.
And I think it is important to kind of look at the lessons from it, not that they're good or bad, but like it's complicated what happens. So, when my mom learned to meditate, it cost $35. That's how much it cost to learn to meditate. And that was, she had to like go, work at a record store and save up the money to do it, but she figured it out. And, it was extra money. Like you could go on courses to Europe and learn to teach meditation, and that cost like $1,500 or something. The TM Cities program, I think from the start, was thousands of dollars. I think maybe $3,000. I learned 6 years ago, and it was, I think, $6,000. So it's expensive. It's extremely expensive. Now, Maharishi said, people would say, like, why does this cost money? Why does this cost so much money? And over the decades, TM has cost more and more money, although it's come back down. Just the basic technique that costs $35. And his answer always was, Americans don't value things unless they pay for them. And this is extremely precious and valuable, so you need to pay for it. I think it's a funky explanation. I've heard people now who teach TM just talk about the costs of making a salary as a TM teacher, and that's the cost, which makes more sense to me.
Yeah, it's really interesting. On the one side, I look at that, I'm like, oh, wow, I don't have a good reaction to that.
Yeah.
On the other side, I look at it, and so I've been an entrepreneur my entire adult life, and a marketer and a studier of the psychology of influence and behavior change and what motivates people to take action and then value the choices that they made. And there was a certain truth to it.
Yeah.
I think what sits so wrong with certain people is that it's the product.
Yeah.
In the context of that same sentence, if you were buying a car, if you were buying something like this, but when you talk about this, something which is so many people associate as being like a gift that should be, given to and taught to every person in the world, because the net effect is elevated consciousness, pervasive kindness, compassion, the betterment of humanity, that to put such a high financial barrier on it, does a disservice to that bigger goal. And at the same time, I understand the psychology of it. So it's not clean.
It's not clean. And meditation is a special object or product or whatever you want to call it. I think about, a question I get, I've gotten a lot in talking about the book is, about whether I'm going to have my kids meditate or whether I make them meditate, because I had to, I started meditating when I was 3 and I had to meditate every day. My meditations were graded for a while in school. And I can't make my daughter meditate. I can make her play the piano. I have zero qualms about that. When she whines about it, I'm like, just play it, It's going to serve you well in the long run, which you could say exactly the same thing about meditation, but I don't think you can force somebody to do it the way you could about a piano. So it's not a religious product necessarily, but there is something so ephemeral and special about it, And so in terms of assigning it value, in terms of forcing it on people, it's complicated.
Yeah, I totally get it. I'm a dad also, and I have a meditation practice in a different tradition, but every morning I'm the first one up and I sit and, as my daughter got older, she would come out and just see me sitting quiet. And she knows I do it. She knows why I do it. She knows what I do. And so she's exposed to it and she sees the benefits of it. And I kind of feel similarly. I'm like, if and when, there's a choice that you want to make to come to it, awesome. I'll support that. I think it's great. And at the same time, it's got to come from you.
Yeah, it's good to know that it's an option. Like if you're a kid who's experiencing anxiety, I think you're feeling, the thing that my daughter won't have that I had was it was truly part of my sense of self from the beginning, is that quietness, and I don't know what it is to not have that. I have no experience of that. So she'll have something else, I guess. She'll have what other people have. I don't know what that is.
Yeah. So let's dip back into your story then. So you're there and you're growing up. Your mom is deep into the community. She eventually saves up the money to do the flying trainings. And as you're getting older and sort of moving towards your teen years, what's going on in your head and your experience of living where you were living, experiencing the whole community, and kind of hitting a formative stage in your life?
Yeah, so we were living in Utopia Park, which was a meditator-only trailer park on campus. And my brother and I were both going to the Maharishi School of the Age of Enlightenment, which was a kindergarten through 12th grade school that, was really, they called it consciousness-based education, and they still call it that. It still exists. It was really just saturated in Maharishi's knowledge in every aspect, every subject. His philosophy came to bear. And we meditated at the beginning and end of the day. We did school plays from the Ramayana. It was very much Maharishi's vision of an ideal school. And so, a lot of that was beautiful and positive and fun. Over time, I saw how much, so both my brother and I were on scholarship, and then she had to work at the school part-time to help supplement the cost of the school. And, it cost $100 a month to get a badge to go to the Dome. And I just saw how my mom was working like always 2 or 3 jobs, plus meditating 3 or 4 hours a day. And I felt like I didn't see her very much. I felt like she was stressed out. As a teenager, I feel like your hypocrisy button gets like really sensitive.
And big.
It gets big. I'm
like
scared.
Hitting it all day long.
Exactly. That's all you see.
Right.
And so that's what I saw. I saw that this was a community organized around bliss consciousness and 24-hour bliss and all these ideas of just joyfulness and relaxation. It was a meditation community. And yet, my mom was just like totally spinning, trying to make it all work and afford it all, and stressed out and worried and like living month to month. And I think I resented her being stressed out, so my poor mom, like every time I see her anxious about something, it's like, I guess that meditation's not working, Nightmare. It's like,
not nightmare, it's just like teenager.
It's total teenager.
Right, that's what you do.
I did my job as a teenager.
Right. And it just happened to be in sort of like a very extreme, different environment that most of us are used to.
Yeah. So as soon as you see any kind of, and same with your teachers, you'd push your teachers' buttons as far as you could. At school we were segregated in genders. It was gender segregated. And so, I remember like these female teachers crying, and like, we'd get them to cry. The boys would get their like male teachers to like freak out and get angry. Like we would push them just to see the emotion, because there was such an emphasis on like a flat,
even, like,
a flat kind of happiness, only positive thinking. I was often sort of corrected to think if there was a way to say something positively, there was no negativity was allowed. And so that kind of tightness, as a teenager, you really push against it.
Where'd that lead you?
I mean, kids in the school, I ended up going to public school, and kids in the school, and this kind of continued after, into adulthood, there was a split. So you have the kids who just totally stayed in the fold and adhered and ended up, following all the rules and probably marrying each other, marrying classmates and staying in this sort of bubble of belief. And then there was the rest of us who, to varying degrees, rebelled. So we were sneaking out at night, we were drinking, we were doing drugs, we were having sex, we were hanging out with the townies, who were the non-meditators. And we just loved everything that wasn't meditation, like the townies were these like sort of other world of, metal music and beer and eating meat, it's like
it's like just a checklist of everything that you couldn't do, right?
R-rated movies, smoking cigarettes,
which is all, again, it's like, okay, so normal teenage stuff, like you just happen to, the contrast in your world was so much more extreme than your average teenager.
Because it was extreme on the positive end, kids went hard, taking 12 hits of acid and like trying to bomb the post office, like throwing like ninja stars into the school, on PCP. This is not me. I'm just saying generally.
Yeah. You've heard stories.
Yeah. I've heard about people who might do that.
You knew people, maybe. No names. I can't remember any names.
Yeah. So, it got really wild on the other side. And at the same time, for me, I think I felt alienated because, I was going to the public high school, and the townies were suspicious of me because I wasn't like them. And
they must have been suspicious about the fact that there was this whole thing that seemed just like alien.
I mean, that's the story in unto itself. I mean, there was all sorts of fights and,
I would imagine.
Yeah, like cars with windows smashed, just there's a long history of that. I think it's gotten much better. I mean, now it's been 40 years or so. So I've heard that it's much more friendly, but in the 80s and 90s, it was not. So I think I felt really, of neither world. I was sort of ejected financially because we couldn't afford to go to the Maharishi school anymore, but we're still living in Utopia Park.
Is that why you ended up in public school?
Yeah.
Got it.
So we were still living in Utopia Park. So I have to go to school from Utopia Park to the public high school. And there's kids there that are also from the Maharishi school. They raised the prices, so a bunch of kids kind of went out at once. But I felt like I really just wanted to get out. As I said, the dark kept getting darker. Kids around me were becoming kind of more and more rebellious. And I think I just, at this time, I should say my dad came back into our life when he came back when I was 12, and he'd gotten sober. And he lived in Iowa for a couple of years, and then he moved to California, and he was sort of always encouraging me, you need to get out, So I really attached myself to that vision of kind of going to college outside of Iowa and leaving this world behind.
Yeah, so you eventually moved out to be with him when you were 17?
Yeah, I moved to Los Angeles, and then I ended up going to UC Santa Cruz.
Right. When you made that break, was it I mean, it sounds like you've always you stayed close with your mom, but you broke from this tradition. And was it fairly clean at that point, or was it like a progression?
The break?
Yeah.
It's never clean.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say even, I remember being 24 and sort of, talking about my boyfriend at the time, who was like my college boyfriend. And it was like, well, could I marry somebody who didn't grow up meditating? Like, it was pretty deep, And I still meditated. It was still something that as much as it felt co-opted by this world that I'd found hypocritical, it was part of who I was. And it was it's still like a really powerful centering mechanism for me. But, more and more from afar, the TM movement, I didn't feel connected to what was going on and what was happening. I mean, during this time, as I was like a teenager and becoming more rebellious, I would describe the TM movement and Maharishi as getting more and more sort of fundamentalist.
Deconstruct that a little bit.
Well, a couple of things are happening. First of all, he's sort of commodifying all these different ways of living, right? So, Ayurveda being the first one that came out in the 80s is sort of the practice of Vedic health. So it was all Vedic. He became sort of obsessed with instituting Vedic knowledge into the world. Like that was going to be the path to world peace, not meditation so much, but all these other practices. So, there was the health, there was the music, Gandharva Veda, there was Tapacha Veda, which became, by the 90s, like a big fixation, and always fundraising, right? It was always these huge fundraising projects. So for Tapacha Veda, there's like these plans to build these huge monuments, and they had brochures printed up that showed Paris reorganized according to his principles of architecture. In Fairfield itself, suddenly all real estate that had a south-facing door, which was considered sort of inauspicious, was like worth nothing.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, people were this was when I was still in high school. People would park their cars so that they didn't get out the door facing south.
Obviously, I know you've had this conversation, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the word, which is cult.
Yeah, right.
And again, this is complicated. What the definition of that is, and also the multi-layers of the fundamental practices versus the organization versus the players at different levels versus sort of like the bigger institution. But when you start to have so much control over literally every breath that people take and every move they make and every decision that they make, that it controls what door of the car they'll get out of, and you have to ask the question. And I know you did ask the question, and I know you've been asked the question and compelled to potentially use the word or not use the word. So without either one of us labeling yes or no, this is a cult, just take me into the exploration a little bit.
Well, what's cool about it is that just in talking about the car thing, I mean, Maharishi, he didn't come back. He came in 1983 when all these people moved in, and then he never came back. So it was a true sort of Wizard of Oz scenario, right? He's telecasting in from India or later on the Netherlands, but he never comes back. And so his knowledge and his advice, or whatever you want to call it, for a living kind of trickled in through top donors who had access to him, or, top administration officials who had been promoted. Were those people in control? Yes and no, because I also think like they were believers. They were also deciding to do it. Nobody told them that they had to, that, they would be punished in some way if they got out of the car. It was choices they made. It was their belief in his vision that made people do it. So I see the culpability really shared. We were crazy, like he was crazy. We were crazy. Who was crazier, So, as far as a cult, it's a funky term, to say the least. The easiest thing I can say is that, we could have left at any time. And I did leave when I wanted to.
Yeah.
There was no, escaping. To, a ridiculous degree. No one cared when I left, you know? Have I gotten pushback for writing about it? Yes. There is some, sort of speaking truth to power there. There is a power structure there is a sort of understanding of who gets to speak for the movement, and should I be able to describe this experience that I had sort of at a lower rung.
Right. Which also brings up the notion of secrecy. So a lot is known now and a lot is shared publicly. And at the same time, on the most fundamental level, the practice itself has always been held secret. And your mantra has always been, you're sworn to secrecy for life.
Yeah.
So the most fundamental thing that every single person would do twice a day as part of the practice, is sworn to secrecy.
Yeah, secrecy is, I have been thinking about this lately, and it kind of breeds problems, unfortunately. And that said, my husband doesn't know my mantra. I'm not going to tell you. I don't say it. I keep it. I keep that secret, and yet the secrets are layered on top of each other. There are things that are not in that book, There's all sorts of things I didn't put in that book because people feel so protective of them. And, the secret, sacred binary is an interesting one. Is it special because it's secret? And yet you see how there's secrets, then there's access to power, right? If you know the secret, if you know how to teach it, then you're a teacher. That's a higher sort of power. There's in Fairfield, there's a secret temple and only special people get to know. It becomes sort of pervasive, and you see it it's universal. You see it in all religions where it's the secret is magical and powerful, but it's also dangerous.
It is. It's across every spiritual tradition, every faith-based tradition. There are elements of, this is a special handshake. This is there are rituals, there are symbols, there are practices that are deemed only for those who are within the community. It's not, exclusive to transcendental meditation. If you look at almost every tradition, you're going to find that. Because I've thought about, I wonder often if the fact that it's secret, it opens up the opportunity to then overlay nefarious cause or somehow like this. But the truth is, it's anywhere. I mean, you go to the local trade organization, the local league,
right.
Everyone's got their secret stuff where they do that they don't want anyone else to know because come on, we're cool because only we know it. It's this thing. It's funny. I've thought a lot about cults and that word and that label over the years also, and trying to differentiate between just a really hyper-connected community where there's a strong sense of belonging and a cult. And the closest I've come up with, because as soon as you label something a cult, everyone assumes, okay, now that's negative. That turns whatever it is into something bad.
Yeah.
And the two defining things that come to me, and I'm curious what your experience of these two would be, isolating the members from everyone outside the membership, and an emphasis on practices and ideology that disempower autonomy rather than seek to preserve autonomy and self-identity.
Right.
Those to me, those are the big giveaways.
Yeah, it is interesting because if you see this creation of this advanced techniques in the TM movement, the big idea behind it and the big idea of Fairfield was that group meditation had this power, right? So suddenly it's not about just practicing this meditation on your own. It's about the power of the group. You need to be in a group to do it. And so it is this move away from the really kind of cool part of meditation, which is just that it's just you, and it kind of takes it into this, it's about the group and the group effect and group consciousness.
Yeah, there were some pretty big claims made about the group effect over the years also.
Maharishi effect? Yeah, he had a mathematical formula. I mean, I see the question of the cult is there's something there that's sort of at the heart of religion, I mean, a cult is a label created by insiders to label outsiders even, right? So cult is a term baked by the sort of mainstream Christianity to label fringe movements and say, that's not us, right?
That's the history.
That's its history.
Oh, that's interesting.
But it's still, I feel like religious scholars don't want to totally throw it away because there is something about these groups that get isolated and disempowered and have a leader and have, kind of end up in these magical thinking places. But there is, to me, having lived in a community that was a little bit isolated, not entirely, and that, was full of, in my opinion, a lot of really intelligent people who believed a really pretty unbelievable stuff. I see how that can feel so fantastic. Like and that's part of why I wanted to write the book is like, I think, for people who haven't been through something like that, they think that these are people who have like faulty intellects or something that end up in these, or they're weak or whatever it is.
There's some brilliant people.
Right.
I mean, there's nothing cognitively dull about so many of the people who practice AM every day.
No. And having been there, there were totally boring, lame people, trust me, but there were a lot of like really bright, creative, wonderful people. And I still have a lot of close friends that came out of it. But, to be inside of it and to feel like you're a part of it, there's nothing better. And yet to feel pushed out by it or to not believe in it, there's nothing worse. So it's that inside-outside aspect. Right. I think that's the thing with secrecy.
Yeah. It's that sense of, we are hardwired psychologically and physiologically to have to belong. There's no getting around it. Like it's part of our DNA. There's like DNA strands that say you must belong, basically. Yeah. And, who knows where that came from? There's all sorts of theories about it being, it was survival originally, because if you were outcast and alone, you were dead.
Yeah.
So we literally, biologically kind of moved in that way. But the interesting thing to me is there is a certain amount of grace that comes from giving up a thin slice of individuality in the name of belonging.
Yeah.
Which is amazing.
Yeah,
which makes you feel good.
Yeah.
Like you're part of something. There's a community where you feel like these are my people.
Yeah.
They get me. I can drop the shields. And most of us, if we find that, we are willing to give up a teeny bit of, self-identity. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. The question, for me is, where along that spectrum does it turn from you're benefiting from the grace of belonging, so you're willing to give up a little bit, and that's okay, to now you've crossed over to the place where you've literally subverted your individuality in the name of something where it's now actually destructive. And there's no right line test there.
No,
but I think when you're clearly on one side.
Yeah, to me, there's like a, when you see it kind of thing. I mean, I have like a real sensitivity to it. Yeah. So I'm never going to belong to anything, unfortunately. But for me, as soon as somebody stands slightly higher on a stage and tells, a group of people about an experience where they've seen the truth, and you haven't seen the truth, but let me describe this truth to you. I know the truth. I know the way. I've seen something that you don't see, but do what I did and you'll get there right away. That's, to me, the problem. The same thing is where any kind of wanting to touch a person, like a person becomes enveloped in holiness. I went to a meditation retreat for a number of years with this guy who seemed like really low-key Buddhist, and he'd give lectures, and I didn't get a lot of ego. And then one day this woman fell on the ground behind him and kissed the ground that he had walked on. And I was like, I gotta go. That's it. He's probably the same, but I can't be here. As soon as they're it's their aura, or they've got some extra human power.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
But here's where I think it gets complicated though, which is that if it's that person putting that message into the world, I get the creepy crawlies too.
Yeah.
If it's that very same person just kind of saying, I figured out some stuff that's worked for me, try it.
Yeah.
And maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't, but test it. And if it does, awesome, do it. And look, I'm one of you. I'm not elevated in any way, but I've just been leaning into this a lot.
Yeah.
Give it a shot, see how it feels for you. If the idea works, awesome. If it doesn't, that's awesome too. And then others would follow and place on that person sort of an aura or, an elevated status that person never asked for. I think that's where it gets really...
Yeah, I agree. And I think the thing that I'm talking about is where it's it's the capital T truth. It's not hey, I love mountain biking and it feels great and I do it on Saturdays. You should try mountain biking. it's like mountain biking is the way, not mountain biking is
it's
not.
the binary thing.
Yeah, it's like, hey, great, I've chipped away at something, I've figured a little piece of this out, cool, and I love that, and I feel like, I mean, the weird thing about writing this book and having these conversations is that, like, I'm a person who wants to improve. I have the self-improvement thing like everybody else, and I want to change and be better, but I also feel this tension with, like, being okay with what is. And I get nervous when I see, friends or loved ones kind of talk about progressing, or changing in this way where they kind of become this new person where they're going to be, they're going to leave behind all the flaws that they have, and get away from it. And it's almost like kind of revulsion for that version of themselves. And they talk about this idealized state that they want to reach. And it totally gives me like PTSD because I'm like, that is a path of misery, like,
there's
of course,
no there there.
Yeah, there's no there there.
Right.
Like, of course, like, we should all do things to make our lives better and be interested in new things and interested in change. But that binary that I see so much, especially, frankly, in Americans, I don't see it quite as much in other cultures. But I feel like in America, there's that real virtue and vice thing, right? Like, oh God, like I'm so stressed out. I need to go on like a 30-day meditation retreat and then I'll be a new person, and I won't be this stressed person anymore. I'll be this awesome, relaxed person.
It's all, it's like a ladder.
Yeah, it is a ladder.
That you have to climb rather than just, I think finding the grace in this, like in this moment and then this moment and this moment, is the becoming.
Yeah.
But we're so willing to subvert that in the name of getting there.
Right.
Rather than finding it, just not even finding it, but just owning the fact that it is here already. Yeah. We are weird people.
I know.
But here's my question now. I'm curious whether you've explored this. The way that I think my sense is a lot of, especially Eastern-based traditions, have landed in the U.S. is not the way that they're practiced in their countries and traditions of origin.
Yeah.
So I wonder if a lot of that is really, it's the way that we pursue a path where that pursued by people who've been doing it for generations is pursued profoundly differently.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting point. I don't think I know that much about it. I mean, as much as I grew up in this sort of like faux Indian world, I've never been to India. Mm. So it's sort of theoretical to me. I mean, my sense from some of the things that I experienced through Maharishi is that it's an imperfect world too. You have the caste system, you have people who are, of a spiritual caste who are sort of able to go or separated off, and you have people who are untouchable, who can't cross that. I mean, I think, it's flawed. People are crazy everywhere. That's my theory until I'm proved wrong.
Should be the next book. People are crazy everywhere.
It's like a big seller.
Right.
Yeah.
A true to life story.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's interesting that after moving out of this, kind of going back into mainstream life, you end up in divinity school.
Yeah.
What's that about?
I mean, even I was an anthropology major in college, and I think I've always sort of naturally been an observant. I was an observant kid, and I sort of had this experience of being pushed out a little bit as a teenager. And so I've always had the kind of like from the sidelines perspective and enjoyed watching people. And, growing up where I did, I mean, you see the power of belief, it's so transformative. And so, I just was fascinated by it. And so I thought about going back and doing like a PhD in religion, but divinity school was academic. And, I think there's just these patterns to what happens in belief communities and how communities transform, how they survive, how power is transferred. And I just love that at the core of it is these incredible, like, personal experiences. I don't know anything like that, really, besides love. I think just religion is totally awesome in that way, you know?
And you can say love is the ultimate divinity.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I think it's such a cool part of the human experiment. So I loved it. You know, I knew that I wanted to be a reporter. So I went from divinity school to the LA Times.
Right.
I always tried to do religion stories as much as I could.
Right. And you did Columbia J School also, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're kind of moving on with your life, but you're still touching in. Like there's this through line that's always been there, even though it's not through that original community or necessarily through the practices, but you're deeply curious about the human condition and belief and how it affects it, and you want to observe and report on it. What makes you come full circle at this point to say, I need to go back into the world that I started from and answer some questions and do some more observing?
Yeah. I mean, basically I had a kid, you know, which like it was motherhood. It just triggered something for me. You know, I had my daughter, my older daughter, Josie, and I just felt kind of all mixed up in that first year, which many new parents do. But I felt an incredible nostalgia for the past and for a lot of things that I had given up, you know, like I sort of suddenly from where I was sitting, a lot of that looked really good. It didn't look perfect. I wasn't going to move our family back to Iowa, but, you know, I mean, it was a complicated mix of things. I mean, first of all, you know, when I was growing up, my mom referred to like everyone else as Americans, right? Like we weren't Americans, they were Americans. And there was a part of me where I was like, oh my God, like I've become an American. I'm microwaving my food, I'm drinking wine, like the TV's on, the dog is barking, our house smells like meat, you know? Which just was not, you know, I grew up in a house that smelled like curry and like people were barefoot and it was really quiet. There was no TV, which I couldn't wait to get rid of. But then suddenly, you know, you have a kid. And for me, I think I felt this desire to really, you know, of course, not screw her up, but also like really preserve, you know, the like sort of magicalness that you can almost see radiating off of a new baby. And, you know, I just wanted to have some of that belief and utopianism in her life, you know? And I didn't know exactly how to do it. And I think I was also struggling with my own happiness, you know? I mean, I at this point, I was a magazine reporter. I'd been a newspaper reporter. And, you know, I was sort of surrounded by a lot of agnostic or atheist people who had no sort of religious or spiritual life and who were pretty cynical about it. And as was I, but, you know, I sort of had this special place in my heart for it at the same time, the same kind of like yearning. So I went back when Josie, right after her first birthday, and I took the TM City program. I took the month-long.
The thing that made you roll your eyes
exactly.
so much when your mom was like learning it as a kid.
I mean, you know, you can't imagine what my eyes were doing that whole month. It was like, wait, I paid $5,000-$6,000 to be here and left my family, but this is totally crazy.
And describe like what's this called?
It's called the flying course,
right?
Yeah.
So, and what's sort of like the promise that goes along?
Well,
with that?
I should even say before that, I was like, you know, I had to apply to get in. I sort of had to like write a letter renouncing my wild ways as a teenager, you know? And, you know, then you get in this group and it was a mix. I mean, a lot of, you know, it was in Fairfield, it was on the campus. You're staying in these campus buildings, some of which I remember from my childhood. And suddenly I'm back in them and sleeping. Mm-hmm. So I'm like far away from my husband and my daughter and my life. And I'm back in.
Right. But your mom is still there, right?
My mom is there as we speak. Yeah. But, you know, I mean, she was there. She lives there. She doesn't live in Utopia Park anymore. She lives off campus. Thank God. So
you're in this program.
Yeah. And so it just immediately am kind of like a sulky teenager, but I'm also like, you know, it's total, I don't know if you swear on your podcast.
Yeah, you can say it.
It was a total mindfuck because it's like, I paid for it. I came back. Like I've taken all this time professionally to do that, like away from my professional life, away from my daughter. And then I'm there and I'm like rolling my eyes and I'm irritated with my mom, and these people are so over the top and annoying, and I can't believe I've allowed myself to be like, to submit to them. And yet I have to, like, I want something they have. I want this like intangible growth or experience or transcendence that they're promising, that ultimately somewhere deep down inside I believe in. So, I mean, it was totally bizarre. It was a strange month of my life. I mean, we're in these buildings and then you'd see like faculty and staff that I recognized, and it was sort of like, oh, is that, Mr. Munson? Wait, it can't be Mr. Munson because that looks like Mr. Munson 20 years ago. But it is Mr. Munson because Mr. Munson hasn't aged because he's been meditating like a third of his life. I mean, a lot of these people, just their skin looks fantastic. I mean, if nothing else, they look great. My mom looks great. I'm not saying that's why I went back, and I mean, the flying was really hard for me. It was a real sort of struggle. And ultimately I had a experience that was profound and transcendent for me. But it was a struggle and it changed me. And I don't do the technique anymore. Not out of some big philosophical reason, but just didn't feel right when I left the group. It felt too weird and too strange to do. And so ultimately that experience, that month, I mean, we were meditating like up to 7 or 8 hours a day. That experience did sort of deepen my meditations, and I'm much more of a regular meditator now, and I really enjoy my meditations more. So I'm thankful for that.
Did you get what you came for?
I did. I mean, I think I probably thought, like those people I was just making fun of, that I might come back a whole new person. But I think it helped me let go of that a little bit. And it also made me really, because I had some really profound experiences while I was there doing things that seemed absolutely absurd, I saw the way in which you have to kind of let go of that logical part of your mind, and you have to kind of let go of doubt and questions. You have to kind of leap over them in order to have these big, expansive experiences. And I don't think you should let go of them forever, but I think they are a hindrance in the moment.
Is it more about believing or being open to the possibility of belief?
What is the difference?
I think one is just saying, I'm in, whereas the other is saying, I'm open. I think to me, they're like kind of qualitatively different. I had this conversation with somebody who's a spiritual teacher who I did some work with, and I showed up and I did the work, and I didn't get what I came for.
Yeah.
And we had a conversation about that afterwards. And the invitation was made to me. You say you came being open to this, but the whole time it felt like you were just waiting for the evidence to be convinced. Whereas if you came and said, yes, I believe this can give me what I need, then you would have gotten what you need, which is a struggle for me.
I mean, when I think about being in the flying course in this room, and there's slowly the people who fly are being moved out, right? So it's a like incredible dwindling party of losers and non-believers, right? That's how
You're
it
like,
felt.
oh man, I'm still in the room.
Exactly. Oh, 100%. Like, and I was like, of course I'm going to be the last person in this room because I have the darkest soul and, like the ultimate jerk cynic. And so I felt really in that struggle. And, I don't think it appears well on the written page. I didn't want to go on about it in the book, but that struggle over those days in that room, that psychological experience was so intense for me. And so at the crux of this question where it's I think that, for me, doubt is both a hindrance and the greatest thing in my life. Doubt got me out. That sounds like a phrase, but it got me, I feel like it has really stood me in good stead. And yet, I see these people around me who seem like they're able to be free or unencumbered in a way that doubt doesn't allow. Ultimately,
I get that.
It can be noise in your head. And I was so tired of that. I was so fed up with that voice of questioning. You know what I mean? I'm like a journalist and I'm a jerk. You know, it's like, I just was so tired of that part. And I didn't believe in it really anymore. Like I actually was starting to lose faith in the doubt, if that makes sense. And so, you know, did I believe ever purely? No, I don't think I did. But I think I just got to a place of like release, of quietness. And that allowed me to have a powerful experience, which was so fleeting, you know, but
when you go back to LA,
right. It's like, wah, wah. It's like dogs barking, kids crying, you know, it's like stuff to do.
But I guess that's the big question now. It's like, how do you take that back when you're, you know, it's one thing to feel that when you're in this utopian place away from everyone, where every single aspect of your daily existence is built around the ability to be in that state, you know, and then that's the big question for me, as always. If you go on retreat, then when you drop back into everyday life in LA or New York or Chicago or Australia, wherever you may be in the world, you know, like, how do you bring as much of that back to the life of a householder? As you can. You know, it's one of the things that always fascinates me about Buddhist tradition is that there are these well-defined paths. There's monastic and there's a householder. You know, and it basically said, okay, you can still be cool. If you just want to live an everyday life, and kind of like, here are the practices that make it okay.
Yeah. I mean, I find daily meditation does help. I mean, I don't have the answer. I'll tell you that right now. But I think the thing that I have been doing in those 5 years since I went is really trying to see the things that I saw as boring or shitty or wrong, like this isn't going the way I thought it should, as like the moments to kind of lean into, almost as if they were these utopian experiences. You know what I mean? So it's like, instead of, you know, when the dog is barking and the kid is crying, to be like, rah, it's like what if that's like that's your time to kind of like lean in and try and feel that quietness. I feel like that for me, like that stress feeling, you know, which I mean, I'm like a sensitive person who grew up in a utopian community. I totally get stressed out and yet like pursue a somewhat stressful life. I think that I try to, you know, make that feel like it's part of the practice, like feel like a meditation in and of itself, you know? Which I feel like the Buddhists might have something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't taken vows, but I've sort of, spent some time studying. But that feels pretty similar. It's sort of like, you know, there's the practices to actually just let it all in.
Yeah.
You know, and then let it all through.
Yeah.
You know, it's a practice in non-grasping.
Yeah, and I think that is like, it's the differentiating that can feel problematic. And yet, like the truth is, sometimes you do need to go away and be quiet. You know, you got to turn off your phone. You got to like step away from everything.
You got to touch stone.
And feel like, be reminded of that feeling of like quietness and self, so that you can kind of bring it back, you know, and you know, like when you've gone too long without it. But yeah, I think it is sort of like letting it, the sort of hubbub of daily life, also be a place of no thought, or as much as possible.
Yeah. So let's come full circle to the name of this is Good Life Project. So if I offer that term out to you, to live a good life, what bubbles up? What comes up to you?
You know, it means a couple of different things to me. I think it's both, I would say, a virtuous life, and in that sense of like sort of a life of doing good for others. And then it's also a life that is one of pleasure. So I don't think you can have one without the other.
Thank you. Hey, thanks so much for listening. We love sharing real, unscripted conversations and ideas that matter. And if you enjoy that too, and if you enjoy what we're up to, I'd be so grateful if you would take just a few seconds and rate and review the podcast. It really helps us get the word out. And you can actually do that now right from the podcast app on your phone, if you have an iPhone, you just click on the reviews tab and take a few seconds and jam over there. And if you haven't yet subscribed while you're there, then make sure you hit the subscribe button while you're at it, and then you'll be sure to never miss out on any of our incredible guests or conversations or riffs. And for those of you, our awesome community who are on other platforms, any love that you might be able to offer sharing our message would just be so appreciated. Until next time, this is Jonathan Fields signing off for Good Life Project.